Thank you so much, Abdul, first for the invitation to talk at the sports analytics seminar, and also for the kind of introduction. So indeed today you're going to have, so I understand that it's the last talk of the semester, and so as a gift for the holidays, you're going to have two talks for the price of one, if I may, because after this talk on the risk of collusion that you see here on the screen, I'm going to be talking more briefly, probably because I don't want it to be too long, on this choose your opponent format that is quite interesting, and I'm a firm believer that it can bring quite a lot of excitement for in tournaments. So I will explain, I will illustrate with the Champions League, for instance. Okay, so first talk will be about the risk of collusion, in particular for the those groups of three that are the format that has been decided by FIFA for the World Cup in 2026, at least. We'll see how it goes. So maybe just a few words about myself. I mean, you introduced me, but I'm, let's say, more known in the quantitative finance community than in the sports analytics community. So I'm a senior quant at Bloomberg in New York. I've been there since 2012, so 8 years already, after 6 years spent at Société Générale, SocGen, which is a French investment bank that I joined after doing a PhD in probability theory and statistics at École des Ponts, which is a French engineering schools. I'm also an adjunct prof at Columbia in the Department of Mathematics, and at NYU at the Quant Institute of Mathematics, where I teach math finance in their math finance programs. But as you can guess, probably, I'm also a sports fan, and especially soccer. Love math and modeling, and so I naturally started doing some sports analytics just on my spare time. And starting in 2014 with the FIFA World Cup in Brazil at the time. And I mean, I got quite a lot of publicity because I have 40 plus articles in the press on math and soccer, including some articles in the New York Times, the Times, Le Monde, which is the French newspaper, El País in Spain, and more soccer-focused journals like 442 or SoFoot in France as well. But also on the academic side with 3 academic papers that were published in Journal of Quantitative Analysis of Sports and Journal of Sports Analytics, and one that is currently submitted. So it all started, as I said, in 2014 with this World Cup, Brazilian World Cup, where clearly, after looking at the draw, I was actually in Brazil the day of the draw, and the 8 groups were clearly completely imbalanced, with like 3 groups that were like really strong and 4 really weak. And so clearly it was sure that FIFA could do better. And, you know, just loving soccer, loving probability, I was like, okay, if somebody can come with something better, I'm probably one of those guys. So I thought about it. And it's actually not such an easy problem. So the problem being that FIFA is imposing geographic constraints on the draw, basically that 2 teams from the same continent cannot be drawn into the same group, and at the same time they want groups that are quite balanced. And so how do you do that, and especially in a way that you produce even distributions, and also in a way such that, you know, it can lend itself to a nice TV show of 30 or 45 minutes, meaning for an example that, you know, the rejection method, where basically you just draw all the teams, and if one constraint is not satisfied, then you just discard the whole thing and you repeat. So that is a perfectly fine mathematical method to make sure that the constraints are satisfied and to produce an even, so uniform distribution over all the outcomes that are admissible. The issue is that this is absolutely not doable in practice, because you would, on average, at least that year, have to repeat the draw 85 times before you get to a result that satisfies all the constraints. So, you know, it's actually not such an easy solution, and I actually came up with a method where basically you draw the continents first and then the team, and so that was published in the Upshot 2014. I don't know if you're familiar with the upshot. It's really good. It's really data-driven journalism. It's under the New York Times. And I'm sure you probably know 538 and Nate Silver. And actually 538 was under the New York Times until the end of 2013. He, at that time, completely disagreed with the top management of the New York Times. We just left abruptly. And, you know, then 538 was on ESPN and now under ABC. And the upshot is exactly what actually replaced 538 within the New York Times. So that's very, I mean, so that was their launch campaign in May 2014. So it was great to be part of this adventure at the time. So that's the article, and the best thing is that not only did they publish my article, but they also actually built a simulation tool. So I suggested that they do that, and they actually they have really good people there, that scientists that I would, you know, I would communicate with them like I do with academics and the best scientists. So it was a great experience. They're really good at the old visualization tool and the D3. So the founder of D3, the creator of D3 is actually one of the staff at the New York Times. And so you actually could simulate draw according to the FIFA procedure at the time, 2014, and the one that I suggested. So the strong, very strong groups were here you see in red with Spain, Chile, and the Netherlands. Here Uruguay, Italy, and England. And for Uruguay it was Germany, the Ghana, the US, and Portugal all together in the same groups. And the green groups are the easy groups. So you see that actually with the method that I suggested, like it's more gray, so it means it's much more even. But of course, an example cannot prove anything. So you just do Monte Carlo by simulating plenty of time the draw, and you will see that you actually decrease the variance, and also importantly the bias. So for instance, the fact that the US ended up in the very strong group, and the same for Chile actually, is actually not due to bad luck at all. It's just due to the fact that the distribution of the strength of the group for the US is really biased towards the strong groups. And so that's what a Monte Carlo analysis can prove. It was also published in Le Monde in France, and also in El País. I even think that in El País it was the number one title for maybe 2 hours, I don't know, and I think it was just probably the day after Spain lost 5-1 their first game, against the Netherlands. I don't know if you remember, so their first group stage game in the World Cup Brazil 2014. And so of course there was a lot of talk about the fact that they were also unlucky, so that we did not explain the loss, but you know, and so it was actually I think like many people in Spain have read the article. And there's also this academic paper that was published a year after in the Journal of Quantitative Analysis of Sports. Other examples of what I've done in the past 5 years include how to solve the seeding problem for the Champions League. So the Champions League actually changed their seeding procedures for the group stage draw. It used to be just 4 pots based on the UEFA coefficient that measures the performance of the club in the last 5 years of European competitions. But basically, Manchester City complained because they, you know, eventually ended up like winning the Premier League, but they could easily be in pot 3 for the Champions League group stage draw because of their not so good record in European competitions, because basically it's a new club, and a new club, but at this level. And so they complain, they say, no, but we win the Premier League, we should be in pot 1 and whatever. So actually, UEFA changed the seeding procedure, and so now basically it's not exactly that, but let's say to summarize, the champions of the 8 best leagues in Europe are in pot 1, but that typically now includes for instance, the champion of Russia and maybe of the Netherlands, that is not so good, and not as good as teams that are in pot 2, for instance, that could be Barcelona, or you know, good English teams. And so that seeding issue, because you end up with very weak groups, the one, say, for instance, with the Russian champion, and like very strong group, like for instance, we have groups that have now like Juventus or Barcelona, yeah, in the same group like this year, because pot 1 and pot 2 are I mean, you are very strong teams in pot 2. I mean, okay, I suggested another method. I will try to not be too long because it's spending away too much time. Another example is a knockout design. So that's linked to the second talk that I will give today, and in particular, it was 2014 was also the same format for the 2014 FIFA World Cup. So that means actually it was 6 groups of 4. 4 groups of 6 would be better, but actually groups of 6, they have like a lot of games. Actually, each group of 6 corresponds to 15 games. Okay, so it's a lot of games in the group stages. You have a group of 6, so that's why actually the UEFA and FIFA, they opted for 6 groups of 4. But the problem when you have 6 groups of 4 is that you have 6 groups, and 6 is not a power of 2. So then when you want to do a knockout bracket, it cannot be balanced. Some group winners play against runners-up, some other against third-place team for the round of 16. And so I suggested another method that's based on the comparing the performance of group winners across different groups, and also same thing for runners-up. And so that basically eliminates the group advantage that I identified for the UEFA Euro. Some people also know me because every year, and it's going to be next week, I published the draw probabilities of the round of 16 of the Champions League. Actually, not only just the round of 16, also like the group stage as I did this year, also for the World Cup 2018. And it's not as simple as it looks like. In particular, many people especially on Twitter, are actually publishing the wrong tables by assuming that if you look at all the possible, so you see actually here you have like the teams, for instance, that finished first in the group, and they can only meet teams that finished second in the group, but they cannot meet the team that was in the same group. So that's why all the diagonal here is 0, because that's group A, and this is group B, and this is group C. Okay, so that's why you have all zeros on the diagonal. And on top of that, teams from the same country cannot play against each other in the round of 16. So that's, for instance, Manchester United versus Chelsea here as a 0 probability, because it's just completely forbidden. And so you could say, oh, I just look at all the possible combinations that are not forbidden. And let's say I have, I don't know, 1,000 of them. And if among them, I don't know, 128 are with PSG versus Basel, then we would say, oh, the probability is then 128 divided by 1,000. But that would be true if the draw were done that way, right? And that would result in the uniform probability of over all the possible outcomes of the draw. But this is of course not possible, because you cannot draw like this, because you need something that can be shown on TV. Because for instance, if you actually typically the typical number of combinations is maybe around 4,000. So if you really want like a uniform distribution, you would actually need to have 4,000 balls, and each ball containing one complete outcome of the draw, and you would just pick one and see, and you get the result. Okay, why not? But then how do you prove that you have really put all the combinations in the big ball, and that you do not put twice or 3 times or 100 times the same kind of outcome, so that you cheated basically? So that's just impossible in practice. So that's why actually UEFA is doing differently. And you really have to look at the draw procedure that UEFA uses. And in particular, it uses some algorithm, probably the backtracking algorithm. That's the one I use to reproduce UEFA's draw procedure, to make sure that you do not end up in a dead end. So you actually just pick a runner-up, and then you look at all the possible group winners that are possible opponents. So possible means that it will not need to dead end, not only now, but even in the future, in all possible future scenarios. And for this, you really need this backtracking algorithm. And then that's exactly how you can get to the correct draw probabilities. So for instance, that year, there was like the December 2017 draw, yeah, it's written here. That's we had a quite extreme example, because actually Chelsea could only have 3 possible opponents, because you had actually plenty of English teams who won their group. And on top of that, so they could not play against AS Roma because they were in the same group. So that's why they had only 3 possible opponents, and in particular, more than a 40% chance of playing against Barcelona. And more recently, I, for instance, looked at how to determine the final standings if the leagues cannot resume as a consequence of the coronavirus pandemic. And it actually happened to be useful for Ligue 1, which did not resume after it was stopped mid-March. And so that's, for example, the article published in the Times, London. Yeah, and so that's to show you a little bit the kind of topics that I like to investigate on my spare time when I do have some time, which is a critical issue actually. So you can have a more precise look at all this on my website and also on my Twitter account that is here. Okay, but let's go more in detail now in the first talk of today, which is about the risk of collusion for the 2026 FIFA World Cup that will be using groups of 3. Sorry. The details are in this paper that is in press with the Journal of Sports Analytics. For a lighter read, you can look at the article that I published in the New York Times just a few days before the 2018 World Cup started. So why groups of 3 will win the World Cup. So enjoy this one. Of course, I enjoyed it a lot, not the least for the identity of the final winner of the competition. And even there was a follow-up of the first article regarding possible new formats that would be better than the groups of 3 formats that FIFA has decided, at least for now. So that will be the last part of this talk about the new format for the World Cup. Okay, so the Soccer World Cup, you know it, most popular sporting event in the world, together with the Olympic Games, organized every 4 years by FIFA, which is the sports world governing body. Look a little bit here at the evolution of the format. It was almost always groups of 4 since the beginning. There was just one exception in '82 where there was a second round of the group stage, and that was with groups of 3. But you see that and you see also like the increase in the number of teams. Okay, it's been like 16 teams for actually a very, very long time. Then for like this 12-year period, 24 teams. And since France 1998, it's been 32 teams. It's going to be also 32 teams next year in Qatar. But starting 2026, FIFA has decided that it's going to be 48 teams. And most importantly for our talks, it's going to be 16 groups of 3. Okay, and each group will play a single round-robin tournament, and in each group, the winner and the runner-up will advance to the knockout stage. So 2 of the 3 teams in each group will advance to the knockout stage. So it might seem harmless to go from groups of 4 to groups of 3, but actually using groups of 3 raises several fairness issues. So of course we have 3 teams. Okay, just A, B, and C, so the schedule can only look like that, with, let's say, teams A and B meeting during the first match. In match day 2, it's, say, A versus C. So A is the team that plays the first 2 games, and then the last game is between B and C. Okay, so it's important to remember that team A is the team that plays the first 2 games. Of course, you already see that we have a schedule imbalance, right? If A qualifies to advances to the round of 16 or 32 actually now, because it's going to start with a round of 32 for the 2026 World Cup, then they will have more rest days than if it's B or C. Actually, B has rest days before their 2 group match group matches. Okay, so there's this schedule imbalance. But a more serious issue, that's the subject of this talk, is the risk of collusion or match fixing. So after match day 2, you see that teams B and C, they will know exactly what are the results of match 3 that will let them advance to the knockout stage. So we say that we have risk of collusion when there exists a result that lets both teams B and C advance at the expense of team A. Okay, and this can badly harm the tournament and more generally the game of soccer, whether the match is actually fixed or not, because outcome uncertainty is at the very root of sports popularity in general. So of course, not all teams would collude if given the opportunity, but even just the suspicion of match fixing could damage the World Cup by just casting doubt on the sincerity of the outcome. And you see that when collusion does occur, it also need not be explicitly agreed upon before the game. It can, and usually takes the form of two teams that are just satisfied with the current score and just refuse to, or just do little to attack each other during the game or the last 10, 20, 30 minutes of the game, sometimes longer, right? So it does not have to be like an explicit agreement. The most famous example of risk of collusion, and actually collusion in soccer, is the disgrace of Guyon, as it has been called. So it was the last match day of the first group stage of the 1982 World Cup in Spain, and West Germany actually beat Austria 1-0. And so as a result, both teams qualified at the expense of Algeria, who had played the last group game the day before. And so it was clear at the beginning of the game that this result would actually qualify both teams, and actually West Germany quickly score a goal, and then after 10 minutes, and then the remaining 80 minutes were just like a joke, like with two teams refusing to attacking each other. So you see here like very angry Algerian supporters complaining about the collusion. So to prevent this to happen again, FIFA decided that all teams in a group would now play their last group match at the same time, so same kickoff time. But of course, how can you do that with groups of 3? As we've seen, the last game can only be between B and C, and there's no way you can prevent collusion this way. So, by the way, even with groups of 4, when the kickoff times are the same for the last match day, you can still have collusion, right? It does not fully prevent collusion. A good example is the game between Denmark and France at the 2018 World Cup. That was a 0-0. Both teams knew that a draw would let them both advance to the knockout stage, whatever the result of the other game in the group, which was Australia versus Peru. And Denmark's manager, Arede, said after the game, like very bluntly, we just needed 1 point. We were up against one of the best teams in the world at counterattacks. So we would have been stupid to open up a lot of space. We stood back, got the result we needed. It was a 0-0, and we were very pleased with that. Okay, so that was very clear. Denmark-Sweden at UEFA Euro 2004 is another example of a possible collusion situation, because a 2-2 tie, which actually was the final result, would qualify both teams at the expense of Italy, whatever the result of Italy against Bulgaria. So actually only the results like 2-2, 3-3, 4-4, if I remember correctly, would qualify Denmark and Sweden, whatever the result of the other game. And the fact that actually the game ended up in 2-2, could look suspicious, and especially like the Italian fans and media were angry. Actually, I remember watching the game, and it didn't look like at all that there was collusion, but that raises this suspicion. The last 15 minutes of the 2018 World Cup between Japan and Poland were actually the same kind of story. I will not detail, in being mindful of time. Peru and Colombia also colluded during the last minutes of their World Cup game, qualifying game for the World Cup 2018 in October 2017. It was a 1-1, and actually this would directly qualify Colombia and would also qualify Peru for the playoff against New Zealand, so basically almost qualifying them as well. And okay, so those are all examples that even with groups of 4, you can still have risk of collusion, but actually risk of collusion will be much worse with groups of 3, as you can guess, and our goal is precisely to quantify the risk of collusion in groups of 3. So we will quantify it. We will also quantify the impact in particular of the match schedule, of the competitive balance, of the point system. So the classical point system of 3 points for a win, 1 for a draw, and 0 for a loss. But alternate point systems that forbid draws, like 3 points for a win, 0 points for a loss, or 3-2-1-0. So that means that actually you have penalty shootout after a draw, and the team that wins the penalty shootout gets 2 points, and the one that loses the penalty shootout gets 1 point, or other systems that may look interesting in terms of like reducing the risk of collusion, but we'll see what happens in reality. And then, so in the end, we will suggest alternate formats for a 48-team World Cup that would decrease or even eliminate the risk of collusion. I think that FIFA is really absolutely decided for 48 teams. I think that there is still quite enough time to change the format. So it's not too late for FIFA to do it. So our assumptions, at least for the first part of this talk, is that we will use the traditional 3-1-0 point system. And the tie-breaking rules that we are going to use is, number 1, the overall goal difference, and number 2, the overall goals scored. And for the purpose of this study, we only need to consider the further criterion, which is like if 2 teams are still even after like the 2 tie-breaking rules are applied, then the winner, if any, of the match between those 2 teams is ranked higher. Actually, here it doesn't matter whether you do head-to-head or global tie-breaking rules, because it's only groups of 3. Because it's FIFA, and FIFA has a tradition of having tie-breaking rules that look at not at head-to-head, but like really the global results against all the opponents in the groups. That's naturally what they would do. Again, there is no difference here with groups of 3, as you can easily check. And we will actually say that the risk of match fixing, denoted by abbreviated by RMF, is aggravated when teams B and C can win the group even after losing their last game. So maybe B is okay to say, okay, I will lose 1-0 the last game, and I'm happy with that, because anyway, even if I do it, I know that I will finish first of the group. Of course, finishing first of the group is interesting, because typically in the round of 32 now, so the group winners will play against runners-up, which are on paper weaker than the group winners. So it's better to end up as a group winner. So what are the situations of possible collusion after match 2? I will denote by GDA the goal difference of team A after match day 2. And so when A has, so let's start with this first. So the risk of match fixing occurs exactly in the following cases. So either team A has 1 draw and 1 loss. Okay, so they have 1 point and there is a risk of match fixing. Or team A has 2 draws, so they have 2 points and there's a risk of match fixing. Or team A has 1 win and 1 loss, 3 points, and non-positive goal difference, right? So you see that in all other situations, actually, team A is fine, because if team A has 2 wins or 1 win and 1 draw, they're already qualified with 6 or 4 points. And when team A has 2 losses, then they have 0 points and they're already eliminated. So they cannot be the victim of collusion. But in all those other cases, they can be victim of collusion. They cannot be victim of collusion if they have 1 win and 1 loss, and the goal difference is strictly positive. So positive in the US. We say strictly positive in France. Now, if you want to look at the aggravated risk of match fixing, so that means that when on top of that, the team can be okay to lose the last game and still finish first of the group. That happens if and only if team A has 1 win and 1 loss, so like here, and the goal difference of A after its 2 games, it's strictly negative, so it's negative, okay, or it's 0, and I is smaller than J. So what is I and J? So let's look at this example here. It's just that when A has 1 win and 1 loss, I is the number of goals of the opponent of A when they won, and J is the number of goals scored by A when they lost. So for instance, if A wins 1-0 against B and loses 3-2 against C, then I is the 0, blue 0 here, and J is 2, right? Is 2. And so those are the situations. So that's easy to prove. So if you look at a simple model, very simple model where I only look at the probabilities of win, draw, loss. Okay, so I will denote by PXY the probability that team X wins against team Y. So you end up, if you want, with this matrix here. We assume that the results of the different games are independent. So DXY, which is 1 minus PXY minus PYX, is just the probability of a draw. Okay, that's of course. And P naught and P positive corresponds to the probability that A has negative, null, or positive goal difference, given that A has 1 win and 1 loss. Okay, so it's a conditional probability given that A has 1 win and 1 loss in the group. And then, of course, you can easily measure the probability of all the situations of team A, sorry, after match 2, and just identify the ones where you have risk of match fixing, identify the ones where you have aggravated risk of match fixing, which is denoted with like star, and here are the corresponding probabilities. And as a result, you can compute the probability that there is a risk of match fixing in a given group of 3 here, and for an aggravated risk of match fixing here. What's interesting is that if you assume perfect competitive balance, so that means that you see all the probabilities P, X, Y's are the same, and of course they have to be less than 1/2, then actually, so I denote by P this common value, the probability of a draw is just 1 minus 2P, and then the probability of risk of match fixing is given here by this formula. And in the case, say, for where P is equal to 1/3, so that means that each game has a probability 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of the win of X, draw, or win of Y, then the result is given here. And if you assume that the probability that you have like a non-positive goal difference for A, given that it has 1 win and 1 loss, which is around 0.6, I mean, that's just a reasonable value, you actually get a risk of match fixing, which is very close to 50%. And actually for the more reasonable value, which is 3/8, why is it better 3/8? It's because, okay, that corresponds to a probability of a draw, which is 1 minus twice 3/8, so that's exactly 25%, and 25% is typically the frequency of draws that you observe in soccer. Then you get also a number that's actually close to 50%. It's actually 42%. So actually, even if in the situation of perfect in the situation of perfect competitive balance, the risk of collusion is very high. As a corollary of what I just presented, the probability that there is a risk of match fixing is maximum and equal to 1 in the case where it's sure, or almost sure, as we say in probability, this is probability 1, that you have a draw between A and B and A and C. Okay, because in that case, that means that the results are a sure draw between A and B, a sure draw between A and C, and so we know that we are in one of the situations here where team A has 2 draws, where you know that there is a risk of collusion. So in that case, there is a risk of collusion, and this currently somewhat explains why FIFA has considered banning draws during the group stage, because basically you see that if you're sure that you have draws, then you're sure that you have a risk of match fixing between B and C. In that case, all group matches, they have a winner and a loser that can be decided by a penalty shootout, and this is a corresponding probability for risk of match fixing. However, when you do that, so it looks like, oh, okay, you are basically removing all the terms where you have draws, because now draws, if you remove the possibility of draw, then those terms disappear. But of course, now you have to increase the probability, the win probabilities, because all the draw probabilities are now reallocated to a win of X or win of Y, right? Because the penalty shootout will eventually decide that there will be one winner. So this actually can or at least it can be quite large and close to the initial value where the draws are allowed. So for instance, if we assume perfect competitive balance, and we yeah, so sorry, so basically in that case, so it means it's just 50-50 probability in each game. The corresponding probability for risk of match fixing is typically greater than 25%. And the probability of aggravated risk of match fixing is also very close to 25%. You see that it's not surprising, because when you look at when happens the aggravated risk of match fixing, it's actually when team A has 1 win and 1 loss. So this is, of course, much more likely in a system that forbids draws, because then yeah, many of the situations when you had 1 win and one draw now are 1 win and 1 loss. Right? It's quite intuitive. So forbidding draws does not eliminate the risk of collusions, and in particular the situations where A has 1 win and 1 loss, and the non-positive goal difference will still be prone to match fixing. Another corollary is that the probability that there is a risk of match fixing is minimum this time, equal to 0, if we are in one of these 3, and actually it's if and only if we're in one of those 3 conditions. So first one is A surely wins against B and it cannot lose against C, or if it loses against C, then its global goal difference can only be positive. Then we know that in that case, A is already qualified, and so it cannot be the victim of collusion. Second situation is when you just swap the roles of B and C. And the third interesting possibility is when A surely loses against B and C, then A is already eliminated and cannot be the victim of the risk of, cannot be the victim of collusion. And so you see that somehow give a hint that if you want to minimize the risk of match fixing, team A should be the a priori strongest team in the group. So that's situation 1 or 2. So that in that case, it's already qualified and cannot be the victim of collusion. Or the a priori weakest team in the group, so that it's likely that it will be eliminated after its 2 games and cannot be the victim of collusion. But team A should not be the middle team, right? That's the intuition that we have here. But of course, those conditions are never satisfied in practice, and there's always a positive probability that an underdog draws or wins, and so that's why the risk of match fixing cannot be avoided. And so in particular, if those quantities are strictly positive, then the risk of collusion cannot be avoided. The fact is there is not only one group. In the 2026 World Cup, there will actually be 16 groups, and that's really a lot. And so, of course, you have to look at the probability that there is risk of collusion in at least one group, because it would already be very bad. And that's, of course, quite large, because you are independently repeating 16 experiments. So that's, of course, just given by this binomial distribution. And in particular, so the probability that the risk of match fixing that there is risk of match fixing in at least one group are given by those quantities that are here. So that's, of course, just very basic probabilities, probability 101. Okay, so let's look at the impact of the match schedule. So that's quite interesting. So as we just said, like somehow team A, which is the team that plays the first 2 games, should not be the middle team, right? If you want, so it should be either the strong team or the weak team. So let's see what happens. For this, we take, for example, an example of win probability matrix, which is given here. So basically, the strong team has 50% chance of winning against the middle team M, and the middle team has a 20% chance of winning against S. So that leaves 30% for the probability of a draw between S, the strong team, and M, the middle team. And you see the other numbers here that are reasonable. If you use those numbers together with the probabilities here, so remember, so again, that's the probability that you have a non-positive goal difference for A, given that A has 1 win and 1 loss. Okay, so basically, if A is the strong team, that's okay, quite unlikely that it has a non-positive goal difference. But if A is the weak team, that's much more likely. Maybe they just won 1-0, you know, just by chance, but then they lost 4-0 the other game or something like that. Those are the other quantities for these probabilities that are needed in the formula. what matters is the results that you see here for those reasonable values. So you see that the best you can get for the probability of risk of match fixing is around 15%. And it's when A, so the team that plays the first two games, is indeed a priori the strongest team. If A is the middle or weak team, then it's around 50%. Okay, so much more. And you see here that you have more than 90%, even in the most favorable case here, where A is the strongest team in all 16 groups, you have more than 90% probability that you have at least one group with the suspicion of collusion. Okay. And on average, 2.3 groups where you have the risk of collusion. So clearly, team A should be the a priori strongest team in the group. But if this schedule is implemented, in particular for all groups, that means that the a priori strongest team in the group, if it's not already qualified or already eliminated, okay, after match day 2, might be the victim of collusion between the two other teams, okay, because only team A can be the victim of collusion. So only the strongest team can be the victim of collusion. The other issue with that schedule is that if team A advances, that's the strongest team, then it will have more rest days than the other qualified team before the round of 32. And that also means that in all groups, if FIFA implements this schedule for all groups, the third match will oppose actually the two weakest teams in the group. So it might not be so good in terms of TV ratings and viewings. Let's now look at the impact of competitive balance. So that's the matrix that I just used here in the middle. Perfect balance with a 25% probability for the draws corresponds to this probability here. Strong imbalance is just I'm pushing more the numbers that you see here. So for instance, there would be now a 70% chance that the strong team beats the middle team. And only a 10% chance that it loses against the middle team. And if you use these new strong imbalance values, you see that you can indeed decrease in the best case, which is the case where S, the strong team, is team A. Okay, so that means that the strongest team is the one that plays the first two games. Then the probability of the risk of match fixing drops to 6%. Okay, but basically it doesn't change, actually even increases a bit for the middle team, and now only decreases it for if A is the weakest team, because now we have a strong imbalance. So it's quite likely that after match day 2, team A, which in that case is the weakest team, is actually already eliminated because it's much weaker than the other two teams, and so that's why you see here it decreases the risk of match fixing. So you see in particular that it's not monotonic. When you have perfect balance, it's 42%. Here, basically the schedule does not matter because all teams are completely equivalent. So it's 42% the risk of match fixing in the perfect balance case, but then it goes up to 52% in the case of where A is the weakest team, and then goes down to 35% for strong imbalance. So it's not a monotonic function of the imbalance. So that's for the middle team here. Interestingly, even in this most favorable case, there would be at least more than 60% chance that there is risk of match fixing in at least one group, and on average one group with the risk of match fixing. And that's really the best you can get. So that means FIFA would make sure that the best team in each group plays the first two games, and on top of that, there is a really strong imbalance. It's quite reasonable that there will be strong imbalance at the FIFA World Cup 2026 because we will have typical groups. I don't know, no offense to anyone, but maybe it would be Brazil and Turkey and Uganda, or I don't know, like some team that is not usually in the World Cup. So as I've told you before, so FIFA has considered forbidding draws precisely to decrease the risk of collusion. So here we are looking at the 3-0 point system. So how would that work? So after a draw, you would have a penalty shootout, and the team that wins the penalty shootout gets 3 points, and the other teams gets 0 points. Okay. Okay. First thing is that this creates a new risk of match fixing, which is a risk of match fixing on penalties, which is when actually team B or C can win the group and eliminate team A even after drawing its last game and losing on penalties. So basically, we're looking at situations where a team is like, oh, okay, I'm okay for a draw. When I have a draw, I know that I will win the group and I will eliminate team A by, even if I lose the penalty shootout. So I can just lose the penalty shootout. It's no problem. So that's of course the situation that FIFA absolutely wants to avoid, because that can be really obvious, right? When that a team would decide to lose the penalty shootout at no cost, just for the profit of eliminating team A, basically, because it could be because team A is a rival or is actually a strong team that they may face again in the rest of the tournament. And so that would, of course, be extremely, extremely bad if this situation occurs. What I also want to tell you is that you could say, oh, okay, so we are just forbidding draws. So it's exactly the same analysis as before, except that now the probability of a draw is 0, and you just reallocate the probability of a draw to both teams, right? So both win probabilities for team, let's say, X and team Y. This is actually not true, because now you can get 3 points with a 0 goal difference, right? Because if you win on penalties, then you will still have a 0 goal difference. The goal difference is not impacted by the result of the penalty shootout. And so the analysis that I've done before actually takes into account the fact that if you have 3 points, then you must have a positive. You must have won by at least one more goal than the other team, right? Which is not the case here, because here you can have 3 points even after a 0-0. So you have to redo the whole thing. So here is the proposition. I will spare you all the details because it's actually quite painful. But basically, you can work out all the situations of risk of match fixing in a given group of 3 in the 3-0 point system. Okay, the corresponding situation of aggravated risk of match fixing. So aggravating in the first definition. Okay, so the team B or C can be okay to lose the last game and still finish in first position. So you see that it's actually quite annoying. You have to go through all the possible scenarios, and also the situation of aggravated risk of match fixing on penalties. So this is the new aggravated risk of match fixing that I just described, where a team is okay to just draw on the last game and can afford to lose on penalty at no cost. Okay, and so those are the situations here, and of course you can compute the corresponding probabilities very easily. Everything is reported in this table, where now you have on top of the 2 classical columns, you have the risk of match fixing aggravated on penalties, and the corresponding probabilities are here. So numerically, what does it look like? So in the 3-0 point system, so remember, the best situation is when you have strong imbalance and team A is the strongest group. So those are the reasonable values of the probability. So I cannot go into the details here. Please have a look at the paper if you want all the details. But there are reasonable values for all the probabilities involved in the situations of risk of match fixing that I just described. And actually, indeed, it's true. If you remember, so what we had before was, let's say, 6% here for the probability of risk of match fixing and 2% for the aggravated one, and 62% was for the probability of at least one of the 16 groups has a risk of match fixing. Now it's a little bit less here, 4.5% here, but it's actually larger, slightly larger for the aggravated risk of match fixing. And on top of that, there is this new risk of match fixing that has been introduced by the fact that now the draws are forbidden, and there is a penalty shootout in case of a draw. Okay, so the decrease that you see here is not that large, and you are actually adding more aggravated risk of match fixing of the first type and creating a new aggravated risk of match fixing here that can be, this one, like extremely annoying. So it's unclear whether it's actually better to forbid draws. Those are the values here. And so that's why it also looks like reasonable to look at the 3210 point system. So that was actually suggested by, in particular, Palacios Huertas after he read precisely the New York Times article about the risk of collusion. He suggested using this 3210 point system. That's true that because you have like more possibilities of point outcome, then that multiplies the number of point scenarios, okay, after the 3 games in the group, and it looks like that it does decreases the risk of collusion. And quite interestingly, it's actually not the case. So the analysis is summed up in this table here. And when you look at the numbers, you can see that the 3210 point system is not actually doing really better than the 30 point system. So instead of looking at just tables, let's look at the graphs. It's easier to compare the numbers. So as a summary, I'm plotting here the probability of a risk of match fixing in a given group, so just one group. I'm comparing the classical point system in blue and the 30 point system in gray and the 3210 point system in red. And I'm considering perfect balance or imbalance in the middle or strong imbalance on the right. And for each of those cases, I consider the different schedules. So the schedule where team A is the strongest team, or the middle team, or the weakest team. Okay. So what is striking here is that clearly the most important thing if you want to decrease the probability of risk of match fixing, which is here on the y-axis, is that team A has to be the strongest team, right? That's the most important factor. That's how you decrease as much as possible the risk of collusion. It is true that you see here that when you go from blue to gray, you are decreasing the risk of match fixing, right? So you are actually always decreasing the risk of match fixing, but the issue is that you're increasing the probability of aggravated risk of match fixing, which is the one against where the team can lose and still win the group. Okay, so it's the most annoying. So it's not so clear whether you prefer to be in the blue point system or in the gray point system. And for the 3210 point system, you see that actually it increases the risk of match fixing compared to the gray, which is the 30 point system. Okay, so what looked like intuitively a good solution is actually not one. You really have to exactly look at the math and compute all the numbers to get to the points. And actually the 3210 point system is not decreasing the risk of match fixing. But that's true that it's decreasing the risk of the aggravated risk of match fixing, as you see here. Those are the corresponding numbers when we look at the probability of risk of match fixing in at least one of the 16 groups. And you see that it's most of the time very close to 100%. Even in the most favorable case, it's around 60% here, including like around 25% of aggravated risk of match fixing. And remember that in the case where we have the draws that are forbidden, we have also the aggravated risk of match fixing on penalties, which is in yellow here, compared to the aggravated risk of match fixing within the 90 minutes of the regular game. And you see that it's actually almost the same order of magnitude. So in all those point systems where you forbid draws, actually you're creating another risk of collusion that's really annoying and damaging. Basically, that's just what I said, so I can skip that. And now to conclude this talk, and for the second talk, it's going to be just only 10 or 15 minutes, so it's going to be much shorter than this talk here. Let's finish this first talk with just possible alternate formats for 48-team World Cup. In particular, ones that would significantly decrease or even completely eradicate the risk of collusion. So all the formats that are listed below, they take into account the requirement that the tournament should not last too long, and in particular, the total number of matches should not exceed 100. And this, in particular, precludes the classical round-robin format with 8 groups of 6 teams, which is a natural format for a 48-team World Cup, because a group of 6 means, what does it mean? It means that each match day you have 3 games, and you have 5 match days, so it's 15 matches per group, and you have 8 groups, right? So that corresponds to 120 games. It's way too many games for the group stage, to be played in even if it could be 3 weeks. That would be way too many games. However, format 6 is close to this one. So let's see. So first format that I suggest is 12 groups of 4. Okay, quite natural in the terms of groups of 4 that have been used for so long in the World Cup. But of course, 12 is not a power of 2. So you would have 12, for instance, here, 12 group winners, 12 runners-up, and 8 best third-place team that would advance to the round of 32. The thing is that it's quite many games because you have 72 group matches and a total of 104 games. So around the 100 limit that I gave myself. So the World Cup would last at least 1 more week if we limit ourselves to 4 group matches per day. Actually, maybe we could have more group matches per day, and that could fit in the 32 days that is the current format. So yeah, it's nice to know that the current format can be completed in 32 days, basically 1 month. It's 64 games, and even the 3-team group format with 80 games can be also completed in 32 days. But as I mentioned, because 12 is not a power of 2, the knockout bracket would be unbalanced, and so some group winners would play against some third-place teams in the round of 32. Others would play against runners-up, and some runners-up would play against each other. Okay, like was the case in the FIFA World Cups in 86, 90, and 94. And at the UEFA Euro since 2016. So by the way, the knockout bracket of the 2020 UEFA Euro has been slightly modified following this study here that I published in Journal of Sports Analytics in 2018, where precisely I explain the group imbalance due to the fact that we work with groups of 6 and suggest solutions for fair knockout designs. The second format that I suggest is still 12 groups of 4, but now only 16 teams advance. So that means only the 12 group winners and the 4 best runners-up. So that decreases the total number of matches to 88 from 104. So that's the main interest. Only a third of the teams would advance to the knockout stage. So that's not much. And the knockout bracket, of course, would still be unbalanced because we would still have 12 groups. Format 3 is 16 groups of 3, but only the group winners advance. So of course, that would eliminate the risk of collusion because it's only the group winner that advance. So there is no possibility of just 2 teams, colluding for advancing, for the 2 of them advancing. So the last group match may be a dead rubber, so that's an issue. So that's, for instance, the case when Team A has 2 wins. Okay, it's already qualified, and so the match B versus C has no interest. And there is still a fairness issue, which is when Team A has 1 win and 1 draw, say win against B and draw against C. Then, so actually A is Team B is already eliminated because Team B has 0 points, and Team A has already 4 points, so Team B cannot win the group. But the fact is Team B still has to play against Team C, and Team C has a draw against A, so if Team C beats B, then they will also have 4 points like A, but they could actually have a better goal difference, and in particular, because Team B is already eliminated, maybe it can precisely send its B team, okay? And actually, so it might, maybe that C would defeat an unmotivated or not a Team B with like not the best players, and so Team A may feel aggrieved. So that actually almost happened at the 1982 World Cup, where the second round of the group stage were with those groups of 3, with only the group winner advancing to the semifinals. And in this group with West Germany, Spain, and England, actually after 2 games, West Germany had 4 points. I mean, sorry, at the time it was like 3 points, but had 1 win and 1 draw. And so basically, so they had won against Spain, which was the host. And the last game was between Spain and England. So Spain was already eliminated. England could actually finish ahead of the West Germany by beating Spain, but actually, well, it ended up with a draw. Probably Spain was playing at home, so we're not ready to just give up and send their B team. But it was close to be this same kind of situation. Actually, the disgrace of Rejon was already in the same World Cup, so that would have been bad. So again, so in this format, the team, so B in this example, can be eliminated after just playing 1 game, so which is not good. And finally, the World Cup winner will play only 6 matches, so 1 less than the current format, where it's 7 matches. So when we have just 1 group winner, like here, a classical procedure to avoid that the last group game be a dead rubber consists of enforcing a flexible schedule where the team that loses the first game, if any, plays the second group game. Okay, and so this way you make sure that the last game is not a dead rubber, but of course that doesn't help decrease the risk of collusion when 2 teams advance to the next phase. Format 4 is 16 groups of 3. Okay, so we stay with groups of 3 again, but now all teams advance, which is quite fun. So the group winners would actually get a bye and directly advance to the round of 32, while the runners-up and the 3rd place teams, they would advance to a playoff round. Okay, and the winner of the playoff round would qualify for the round of 32. So there would be a total of 96 matches, can fit in 38 days. Would indeed eliminate the risk of collusion. All teams would play a minimum of 3 games, which is quite good, right? Instead of 2. Winner of the tournament would need to play 7 or 8 games, depending if they got a bye or not. The thing is that the coaches, the fans, and TV networks, and even FIFA might not like the idea of group winners getting a bye. Okay, so because those best teams, they would not be seen on TV in the playoff round. And if the group winner is team A, say, so that means that, okay, they don't play the last match day, which is B versus C. And on top of that, they get a bye. So they don't play during the playoff between the 2nd and 3rd team. So they would have like 12 days without a competitive game in the competition. So that might be too long. Format 5 is 16 groups of 3, but now you would seed the knockout bracket based on performance across groups. So that's very in the spirit of what I suggested in this paper that I just mentioned in Journal of Sports Analytics, where the knockout bracket is seeded based on the performance of the group winners compared across groups, and same for the runners-up compared across groups. So that means that even if you know that you will win the group, you still want score as many points and as many goals as possible in the last group game, because you want to be one of the best group winners. Because if you're one of the best group winners, then you will, due to this procedure, you will play against one of the weakest runners-up, and so that will increase your probability of advancing to the round of 16 after the round of 32, if you want. So that really incentivizes all teams to perform at their best during the group group stage. Actually, so the second talk that I will give in a moment, but it's going to be just 10-15 minutes, much shorter, is really about that. But the difference would be like actually the best group winner would now choose their opponent. Okay, so they would just pick the runner-up that they prefer. Okay, so that gives them a big advantage. Here, in that case that I mentioned here, where there is no choosing procedure, there's a logistic problem, which is that you have to wait the end of the group stage to know who will be your opponent in the round of 32. And imagine if your opponent in the round of 32 is a team that just played in the very last day of the group stage, then you need at least 3 or 4 rest days, as usual in soccer. So the planners will need to have to plan extra rest days between the group stage and the round of 32 and between the different knockout rounds. And the teams playing in the last match of all groups may be unfairly advantaged because they know all the past results. Format 6 is 8 groups of 6, but instead of having teams in each group playing against all their 5 opponents, they will only play against 3 teams in their group. That's to limit the number of matches. Remember, it was 120 for just one. Sorry, it was 120 group matches for the group stage if we were using 8 groups of 6 in the classical format. But now in this format where each group of 6 is divided into 2 balanced subgroups of 3 teams, then the number of matches decreases to 72. So how would that work? So all teams in subgroup 1 would play against all teams in subgroup 2. Okay, and the best 2 teams overall, and they can be from the same subgroup, would advance to the knockout stage. Okay, of course, it's important to have balanced subgroups, right? Because if basically subgroup 1 is all the best teams, and then subgroup 2 the weaker teams, then basically the team number 3, so team number 3, which is in subgroup 1, it will only place between team number 4, 5, and 6, so the weakest in subgroup 2, whereas team number 4, which is in subgroup 2, the best team in subgroup 2, they will play against the 3 best teams. Okay, so it would be unfair to compare the performances of team 3 and 4 in this case. So that's why the subgroups have to be well balanced. And here I suggest one procedure to do that. It's nice, this format, because each team would play 3 group matches, which is good. And all teams would, of course, could play simultaneously on match day 3 to prevent collusion, or to prevent, I would say, to decrease the risk of collusion, because we know that we cannot really prevent collusion fully. We can use predetermined bracket routes if we want. And so with a total of 88 games, that could fit in about 35 days. So that's actually, it's maybe my favorite format, we can discuss after. And the last format, format 7, is 16 groups of 3. So we stay with groups of 3, but now followed by 8 groups of 4. Okay, so the 16 groups would be paired. For instance, group A is paired with group B, group C is paired with group D, and so on. And the best 2 teams in each group would advance to a second group stage. And the team advancing from paired groups, okay, would form a new group of 4. So for instance, the team A1, the winner of group A, so A1, and the runner-up A2 would form a group with B1 and B2. Okay, but most importantly, the results of the matches played during the first group stage would be carried over. So the results of the game A1, A2, and B1, B2 would be carried over, which means that you only have 4 games left to be played over 2 match days for the second round of the group stage. So the best 2 teams in each group of 4 would advance to the round of 16, and because the results of the first group stage are carried over, the teams would have no incentive to collude, and that would actually be 48 games for the first group stage, 32 for the second one, 16 knockout games, so a total of 96 games. So here is a table that sums up the 7 formats that I just described and suggested, and compare them to the format that FIFA has for now decided for the 2026 World Cup. So in conclusion, so we have quantified the risk of collusion in a group of 3 teams playing a single round-robin tournament where 2 teams advance to the next phase. Most importantly, we've shown that the best way to minimize the risk of collusion is that the team that plays the first 2 group matches is the a priori strongest team in the group, especially if the group is strongly imbalanced. We have quantified how competitive imbalance within a group impacts the risk of collusion, also quantified by how much the risk of collusion would decrease if FIFA does not use the traditional 310 point system, but other alternate point system that forbid draws. So even if it looks appealing on paper, the 3210 point system does not do a better job at decreasing the risk of collusion than the 3-0. And most annoyingly, when banning draws, FIFA would introduce the new problematic situations of possible collusion where a team may decide to eliminate another team by deliberately losing the penalty shootout. Of course, because there are 16 groups of 3, it's a lot and not just one. The risk of collusion in at least one group is very high, even in the most favorable case, where all groups are strongly imbalanced and in every group, team A is the probably strongest team in the group. So this proves that the introduction of a group of 3 is a terrible step back, I think, in the history of the World Cup. So because not only it makes the disgrace of Guyon possible again, but it makes its repetition, the risk of its repetition, very high. And that's why we have also described practical alternate formats for a 48 team World Cup that would eliminate or strongly decrease the risk of collusion with groups of 3, 4, or 6 teams. And as I said, it's FIFA's responsibility to build a fair World Cup. And I think it's not too late for FIFA to review the format of the 2026 World Cup. So I strongly encourage the FIFA Council to realize the danger that's posed by the groups of 3. And if it really wants a 48 team World Cup, which seems to be the case, opt for one of the better formats that we suggested. So here is a list of selected references. So that concludes my first talk. It's been actually even more than an hour, so I've been a bit long. If you don't mind, I'm happy to take your question, but after like a short 2-minute break, if you're fine with that. I'm back in less than 2 minutes, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. That was very in-depth and very detailed and very interesting work as well. So yeah, let's actually do that. Let's actually take some, if we have any questions, either drop them in the chat or, I mean, unmute yourself and ask them directly if you feel like it.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and then we can move on. You can talk about this choose your opponent format.
Okay, I'm back in less than 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, there are a couple of questions that were thrown in the chat. So the first one is, I'm interested, so Colin's interested to know why format 6 was your favorite or one of your favorites.
Let me go back to here. Why is it my favorite? I like the fact that each team plays 3 group matches. I like the fact that you have a number of groups, which is a power of 2. It's somehow quite close to the, because somehow if you want, if we didn't have any constraints on the length of the tournament, the fact that it has to be played in 4 to 5 weeks, we could actually just do 8 groups of 6 with the classical round robin, right? So each team in a group of 6 would play once against each of the 5 opponents. But as I mentioned, there would be 120 games only for the group stage, which is a lot. But that would be very nice, because then that's a situation where you have, okay, 8 groups of 6, maybe 4 teams in each group of 6 qualify. So that's why you can start with a round of 32 if you want, because you have a number of groups, which is a power of 2. That's very easy to build a knockout stage that is symmetric and balanced, with no issues with runners up, group winners playing against runners up or against third place team, these kind of things. But because you cannot, because of the too many games with the classical 8 groups of 3 with the round robin. Sorry for the noise, it's New York City, so when it's not the police, it's people honking. Well, anyway, but here somehow you retain the nice structure of 8 groups of 6. You have 3 group matches per team. You have this so this number of groups, which is a power of 2, but still you're able to maintain number of matches which is not too large. So actually 72 for the group stage instead of 120, and so that's actually a total of 88 games, which is really close to the 80 games that corresponds to the format that FIFA has decided for now. So in that sense, to me, it's that's why I like it. I also like format 7, which is a format that has been used in handball. I actually also kind of quite like 16 groups of 3 and all teams advance. The thing that's really annoying here is the fact, I think, that if Team A is the group winner, then they would have 12 days without playing any competitive game. So I think this is not good. But apart from this, I would also be quite happy with this format. There are plenty of interesting solutions that eliminate the risk of collusion or decrease, because here you would not really completely eliminate the risk of collusion, because it's like it's like in groups of 4. The last match day, all teams would play with the same kickoff time, but we've seen that does not completely prevent the risk of collusion. Then after, it's a matter of taste, and different people would have different tastes about what is the best format. I don't, you can come up with metrics, but metrics will also be kind of arbitrary. So there's clearly, I don't see how I could define a format that overperforms all the others. I don't think that really makes sense here, but I think this one is actually quite nice.
Thanks. And I think Ethan also had a question. Ethan, if you want to just unmute.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. That was really interesting. I was actually, as soon as I read the topic, I was super curious about this talk because it sounded really exciting and it lived up to that. So thanks.
Thank you.
One of the things that I found really interesting is when you were going over all these formats, there's so many different objectives you have to balance for the best format, and it's really not clear what the best one is. And I had a few questions that I was thinking about while you spoke, but then you sort of addressed them, like the flexible schedule, and can that help with the collusion, and then the dead rubbers, I think is what you called it. And then I hadn't actually thought about, I was thinking that buys could sort of solve the problem a bit, but yeah, it is annoying because first of all, the team who plays well, you want to see that, you want to watch them more, you don't want them to play less, right? So yeah, I guess the question that I had for you is are there any other ideas with multiple group stages? I think the last idea.
Yeah, last idea is with multiple group stages. This is quite good in the sense that the number of games is not too large. Indeed, completely cancels the risk of collusion, because of course the results of the first group stage are carried over, so you certainly want to win all the matches in the first group stage. Because of the limit in terms of the number of days for the FIFA World Cup, I don't really see another multi stage, group stage, that would fit in the for let's say 5 weeks of the tournament. So I think it's hard to find another multi-stage group stage that would satisfy the criterion on the calendar. That's my guess. Because of course you can. I mean, if you have no limit on the number of days of the tournament, then you can consider plenty of or multi-step group stage. I don't know how you want to call them, but basically some teams from group stage number 1 qualify for group stage number 2, and then the best team here qualify for group stage number 3, and so on. But of course, if you want to play this in 32 days, or maybe just a few more than 32 days, but not many more days, then yeah, that's where the constraint is hard.
Hi, I know you answered my question, but I didn't actually catch any of it because my Wi-Fi just cut out. Would you mind saying that again? I'm so sorry.
No, I'm okay. So you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. No, basically I was saying that the hard constraint here is the length of the tournament. Because of course you can consider plenty of formats where you have a group stage number 1 with the best teams qualifying to group stage number 2, with the best teams qualifying to group stage number 3, and so on and so forth. And if you have no time limit on the duration of the tournament, then yeah, that's all fine. You have plenty of possibilities to explore. But given that the World Cup is played in 32 days, maybe they can slightly increase the length, but I doubt it because the international calendar is already completely packed. Yeah, it's hard to get with other multi-step group stages formats that would fit these requirements of the length of the tournament.
Mm-hmm. All right, makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
Yep. So I don't think there are actually any other questions right now about the World Cup. So if you want to proceed to your
okay,
choose your point format. Yeah.
Okay, I promise I will do like no more than 15 minutes because it's yeah, I've already talked a lot and it's Friday evening, so no more than 15 minutes. I promise on that one. It's 36, so that means at 50 I will have to stop talking. I'm sure you're enjoying the honking of New York City. Okay, so let's do it this way now. I'm gonna share that screen. Can you see it? Do you see my screen?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Okay, very good. So it's actually somehow linked to the first talk in the sense that it's about like a new knockout format for sports tournament. So I've in particular mentioned, you know, this one of the formats actually I did not go over it again during the questions, but it's basically you would keep those 16 groups of 3. In each group, you have a group winner and a runner-up that qualify. But actually, you would compare all the group winners, the 16 group winners, and you rank them number 1, number 2, until number 16 by just, you know, comparing the number of points, the goal difference, the goal scored, like the usual criteria. And then you will also do the same for the runners-up. So from number, let's say, 17 to number 32. And so you would say, okay, team number 1, the best group winner, plays against team number 32, which is the weakest runner-up. Okay, and then team number 2 plays against number 31, etc. Like in the March Madness, you know, basketball tournament. Okay, so that's a possibility. But somehow, if you do that, the best group winner may end up maybe team number 32 is actually quite strong. Maybe it was not so strong indeed during the group stage of the competition, so that's why they're number 32. But still, number 1 would rather avoid team number 32, and so in the format that I just described, they have no choice, right? It's number 1 is assigned with number 32, but actually the group winner could feel unfairly rewarded for being the best group winner in that case. And so that's why with this choose your opponent format, I would actually give the best group winners the possibility to choose their opponents, for instance here typically among the runners-up. And that's quite interesting. I think it would actually, it could be an interesting format to revive and give more excitement to the Champions League. Actually, I think that the Champions League is currently having like not numbers of TV ratings and viewings that are not as good as before. So I think it's nice to try to find ways to revive the competition, and that's one. Okay, so basically, as I said, the teams that have performed best during a preliminary group stage can choose their opponent during the subsequent knockout stage. So the main benefits would be that the group stage would be more exciting, because it gives teams a strong incentives to perform at their best level. Because of course, you have a big benefit if you're the best group winner, okay? Because you would have the first pick, a little bit like in the draft, right? So that's why it's very that pushes all teams to perform at the best level, even if they already know that they will finish first in their groups. They will still want to win and score as many goals as possible. So the group stage will also be more fair by limiting the risk of collusion, actually effectively cancelling the risk of tanking, and making sure that the best group winners are fairly rewarded. Advancing teams would choose their opponent during new, much anticipated TV shows that would attract a lot of media attention, and that introduces a new excitement element of strategy. What's the strategy followed by the teams in terms of picking their opponents, and that could actually bring a completely new competition dynamics. I will illustrate with the round of 16 of the Champions League, but this format can also be adapted to maximize some objectives. So for instance, the number of home games during the knockout stage of the UEFA Euro 2020. So the traditional brackets, so for instance, this one for the 2018 FIFA World Cup. Oh yeah, by the way, I didn't mention, but actually my work about the 2014 FIFA World Cup group stage draw actually made its way towards the top management at FIFA, and actually FIFA changed the rules for the draw procedure in 2018 and adopted one of the 3 suggestions that I formulated in my paper, and in particular the constraint on the geographic constraints, and the fact that 2 teams from the same continent cannot be drawn into the same group is now well enforced in the draw. It used to be badly enforced until 2014, and actually in 2018 the group stage was much more interesting, and the groups were much more balanced. Anyway, I close the parentheses. This is the classical knockout stage, okay, where group winners of A plays against a runner-up of B, and so on and so forth. You have it here. But of course, what may happen is that you can maybe you're A1, but actually B2 is a very strong team. It could be that just they finish second in Group B because of bad luck, or because bad referee decision or something like that. And so maybe A1 would feel poorly rewarded if they have to play against B2, because B2 is a very strong team, and maybe they would prefer to actually choose their opponents rather than being forced to play against B2. So the 4 main flaws of this traditional hybrid design is the risk of collusion. Okay, we just discussed it. The risk of tanking. One of the most famous example is the badminton tournament at the Olympics 2012 in London. 4 teams were ejected from the competition for not using one's best efforts to win a match and conducting oneself in a manner that is clearly abusive or detrimental to the sport, following round-robin matches the previous evening, during which the teams were accused of trying to lose in order to manipulate the knockout bracket. So basically, I don't know if you saw the videos of those games, but like so it happened actually in 2 matches, and in each of those 2 matches, like the 2 teams were just trying to lose. So they were completely really tanking just because they wanted to be on one side of the knockout bracket, right? So that's why they were actually ejected from the competition. Actually, England, Belgium at the 2018 FIFA World Cup was also the same kind of thing, because I don't know if you remember, but that was the last match day of the last actual day of the group stage, and basically the winner would end up in the half of the bracket with Brazil, with the likely opponent in quarterfinal, and in France, with France will be the likely opponent in semi-final if the team won, while the other team would face like a much easier opponents. Actually, as it happened, Belgium won that game against England, and indeed they played against Brazil in quarterfinals, and then they played against France in semi-final. So that actually happened, whereas England, by losing, they played against Sweden and Croatia, okay, which are less, I mean, not as big soccer powerhouses as Brazil and France. So that's one of the risks. Absence of win incentive. Okay, some teams may have secured the first place of the group stage before their last group game. So that happened with Italy at the Euro 2016, Brazil and Nigeria in the 1998 World Cup. Basically, they knew after the second game that they would win their group. Okay, but here, yeah. So with the new format, you know, there would be a lot of winner incentives, right? So it's what I mean here is that if you know that you will end up first of your group, okay, and the knockout bracket has predetermined routes as the one I just showed, the classical bracket for the World Cup, then you can just actually send your B team for the last day, and that distorts the results of the group and the fairness of the competition. And eventually, group winners may feel poorly rewarded. As I say, if B2 is a strong team, maybe you're not happy to be A1. Also, this happens, for instance, during the draw of the round of 16 of the UEFA Champions League. So now it's not predetermined bracket routes, but you have a draw that determines the round of 16 matchups, and you could be, for instance, the best group winner of the group stage, and still you end up with say Real Madrid or Juventus in the round of 16. So you may feel poorly rewarded for being the best group winner. So how does it work, the choose your opponent knockout format? So actually, so the teams that have performed best during the preliminary group stage will now choose their opponents during the subsequent knockout stage. So the first, so let's say in general, 2 to the power n teams that qualified for knockout stage would be ranked from 1 to 2 to the n based on their group stage results. So for instance, you would put all the group winners first, and then you compare all the group winners, again, number of points, number of goal difference, then number of goals scored, and etc. Then you would rank all the runners up, and so on and so forth. At this point, of course, you have the natural knockout brackets that I mentioned in the previous talk. So number 1 would play against, say here it's a round of 16, number 16, and number 2 against number 15, and so on and so forth. You see the ideal bracket that is here is just a canonical bracket, which would, you know, end up with the semifinals 1 against 4 and 2 against 3. I mean, it's all like somehow the perfect bracket. But actually, for instance, if hypothetically, if UEFA had used, for instance, this ideal bracket during the Euro 2016, so the match between number 2 and number 15 would have been Germany versus Portugal, because Germany was the second best group winner, and Portugal was actually number 15. It was the third place team in Group F. And Germany maybe would not have been very happy to play against Portugal as a reward for being the second best group winner. Portugal is a power soccer house, and actually, as a matter of fact, was the future winner of the Euro 2016 tournament. I remember very well because I was in the stadium during the final against France. And so you see, you have also flaws for the ideal bracket, in particular the fact that you may not be happy with the opponent that you get, even though on paper number 2 should be happy to play against number 15, but in practice it's not necessarily the case. Of poorly rewarded group winners in history, for instance, Brazil, I remember having to face Argentina in the round of 16 of the 1990 FIFA World Cup. Argentina finished third in their group after losing the opening game against Cameroon, and we know that they reached the final with a certain Maradona who unfortunately is not with on this planet anymore. Arsenal and Napoli having to face Bayern Munich and Real Madrid in the round of 16 of the 2016-17 Champions League, despite being among the best group winners. And I will take this example of Tottenham and PSG, so the best 2 group winners in 2017-18 group stage of the Champions League, having to face Juventus and Real Madrid in the round of 16. I will take this example, and I know I still have just 2 minutes. So the choose your opponent knockout format is very simple. So for the full choice implementation, but just team 1 in the global rankings would choose their opponent and all the other teams. And then team 2, if it has not already been picked, would choose their opponent among the remaining teams, and so on and so forth. For the restricted choice, let's say you would cut all the advancing teams into 2 sets. And so let's say, for instance, group winners and runners-up. And for instance, the group winners could only pick a runner-up, right? So team 1 could only pick a team between 2 to the power n-1 plus 1, and so on until 2. So the second half of the advancing teams. And team 2 would choose their opponent among the remaining teams in the weaker half, and so on and so forth. So the choose your opponent, okay, so for the subsequent rounds, the same choice procedure would be applied using either updated ranking or frozen ranking. So frozen ranking, you mean you freeze the rankings after the group stage, or updated ranking means you update your ranking after the result of each knockout round. So it happens that the choose your opponent knockout format is actually used in the Austrian Ice Hockey League, and has also been used in the Southern Professional Hockey League in the US under the name Challenge Run in 2017-18 and 18-19. The English Rugby League also applied it under the name Club Call in 2008-2014. So it's not the classical rugby, right? It's what's called Rugby League. It's a little bit different. And it was only for semi-finals. The format has also been used in bridge, chess, sailing, online video games. But it seems that it's never been used in most popular sports tournaments, and it could really be used in major sports tournaments like for soccer, the FIFA World Cup, UEFA Euros, Copa America, African Cup of Nations, so the Champions League, Europa League, playoff qualifiers, and so on. For the playoffs of the regular domestic season for all the North American leagues, NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL as well. And for the World Cup, Continental Championships for handball, basketball, volleyball, also for rugby, for instance, the World Cup or the European Club Competition, and even for tennis, for instance, the ATP finals, they use a first group stage and then a knockout format. So the benefits would be virtually no tanking. So for instance, with this system, the 2012 Olympics badminton tournament scandal would have been avoided. You maximize the win incentive during the group stage. So team would really have a strong incentive to win, because it's such a big benefit to be the best group winner that you would try to win as many games and score as many goals to be the best group winner. Decreased risk of collusions for the same reason. And I think that really the picking procedure would lend itself to an exciting, much anticipated TV show that would be scheduled right at the end of the group stage and right after the knockout rounds are finished. And it could give a whole new dynamics to the tournament. In particular, the picking strategies of the team would for sure be much commented upon in the media and among the fan. For the drawbacks, one drawback is the schedule, because depending on the sport, more match-free days may be needed between the end of the group stage and the first round of the knockout stage, and between rounds of the knockout stage. And that's because in some sports you need a minimum number of rest days that's guaranteed to all teams between two games. So for instance, let's say 3 rest days in soccer is typical. So because of course, if you pick a team that just finished playing the group stage, then you can play the next day, even if yourself you already had 3 or 4 rest days. So that's why you need to be mindful of those rest days. And another issue could be that the first pick teams could feel offended or humiliated. However, if a team is one of the first pick, it probably means that it really is one of the weakest remaining teams, and yeah. So as such, it's just a matter of fact somehow. And actually, moreover, that actually gives those teams the best and strongest motivation and incentive to prove their pickers wrong when they face them on the pitch, right? So let's say, I don't know, oh, you pick me, you think I'm the weakest one. Okay, I'll show you on the pitch what I mean, who I am exactly. So this system, the group winners could be compared across groups, and the best group winners would be given a big benefit. So of course, it's crucial that the groups be well balanced. Of course, if you have a group that's with one good team and other teams that are like very weak, then it may actually finish the best group winners and have this big benefit, but it would be undue, if you want, because it's just because the groups were not well balanced. So I explained, for instance, that I have worked on this seeding issue, and actually, so one of the solutions that was for the FIFA World Cup was actually adopted by FIFA for the 2018 World Cup. So to finish, and I'm sorry because I'm 5 minutes more than what I said, but it's the final example. I want to show you how we would work. I think that's how you probably best understand how it works. For the round of 16 of the 2017-18 UEFA Champions League. So that were the results, with the group winners here. The 2 best group winners were Tottenham, were particularly good that year, even though they were in the same group as Real Madrid. They ended up with 16 points out of 18. Second was PSG with 15 points, in the same group, by the way, as Bayern Munich, 15 points as well, but they were second because of the head-to-head results. And you see all the other teams here, group winners and runners-up on the right. And that was the table for the round of 16. So you see in particular that Tottenham, being the best group winner, got as a reward Juventus, and then PSG, second best group winner, 15 points, got as a reward Real Madrid. So not so nice as a reward for your good group stage performance. So in the choose your opponent format, of course, it can easily be adapted to take the country and group constraints into account. Okay, remember that for the round of 16 of the Champions League, you cannot play against a team that was in your group and a team that is from the same league, the same association. And so exactly as is done today for the draw of the round of 16 of the Champions League, to make sure that the team's choice is acceptable, that means that does not lead to a dead end in all future scenarios, then you can use the backtracking algorithm or any other computer program to provide the list of admissible opponents ahead of each pick. Let's look at the example here, how it would have worked that year. Tottenham is the best group winner. Okay, so they can pick freely among all the runners-up, all except Chelsea, because Chelsea is also English, and all except Real Madrid, because Real Madrid was in the same group as Tottenham in the group stage that year. So all the blue teams are possible picks for Tottenham. So it's Bayern Munich, Basel, Donetsk, Shakhtar Donetsk, Juventus, Porto, and Sevilla. Let's say, for instance, they pick Basel, right? No offense, but that's their choice. So then it's Paris Saint-Germain's turn. Okay, they can play against every runner-up, but not Bayern Munich because they were in the same group. And of course, not Basel because Basel has already been picked by Tottenham, so it's now grade. Okay, so they can choose either Real Madrid, Shakhtar Donetsk, Chelsea, Juventus, Porto, or Sevilla. Well, let's say they pick Shakhtar Donetsk, right? That sounds, again, no offense, but that sounds a reasonable choice for PSG at this stage. Then it's Manchester City's turn. Again, can play everyone except Chelsea, because it's another English team, and Basel and Donetsk, because they have been already picked. And so let's say among all the teams that remain, they pick Porto, for instance. Okay, makes sense here. So it's Porto, and now it's Manchester United, Manchester United. Here are the possible choices here. Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Juventus, Sevilla. Well, let's say maybe Sevilla. Okay, looks the most natural choice at this stage. Then it's Barcelona's turn. Okay, Barcelona can play only against Chelsea, Bayern Munich, and Real Madrid. Juventus was in the same group. You see, it was Group D, both teams, so they cannot play against each other. Let's say Barcelona picks Chelsea, and in the end, we have Besiktas, who was a group winner that year, can play against Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, or Juventus. Say they pick Juventus. And then Liverpool has to choose, not easy, between Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. Let's say they pick Bayern Munich. And eventually you end up with Roma, Real Madrid. Okay, so that would be your round of 16 table. And I'm sure that, yeah, Tottenham and Paris Saint-Germain would have much liked the opportunity to pick their opponent, particularly that year. So when you compare the two tables for the round of 16 draw, well, you see that yeah, they get much more fairly rewarded. But the point is that it's not only about that; it's about having like a lot of win incentive during all the match days of the group stage, plus having an interesting picking procedure and the strategic component that is added to the competition. The idea was published in Le Monde, actually exactly 1 year ago. If you read French, you can go for it, okay? And it's also on a preprint that I posted last November, a year ago, that you can see here. And this is stuff selected references.